Hello everyone, welcome back to a new build order guide. Today we're going to be having a look at the build that Zes used. Last I am Katowice, used it to beat Serral in the semi-final and then lost to Rogue in the finals. Now back then he had a slightly less optimal version of the build and it has been slightly improved. So I think if he would use the current version that we have now back then in the finals, I think he might have been able to win. Anyway, let's dive into the build as something important happens very early on. We build a pylon at 13 supply rather than 14 supply. And then once we start our 14 probe, we immediately chrono boost it. So that's a very big difference from the regular 14 pylon. Now, the reason we do this is so that we get a very fast pylon. We can send our probe across the map as soon as possible. And we can block our opponent's natural. Now, this is possible on almost all maps. You see, it's kind of tight here. He has 250 minerals. When I arrive, he needs 300 for a hatchery. So 50 minerals, too fast for him, basically. So instead, he adds 2 more drones and has to go over here. Now, we follow up with the regular 16 gateway, 17 assimilator. So we can really, get this build on the way, of course. Now, the interesting thing about this build is that it's very similar to a build I uploaded about a year ago, which is the 5 gate into DT, glaive adapt into DT build. It was lacking some of the finesse that this current iteration of the build has, and this one doesn't necessarily need a dark shrine. I will show you guys, if you want, that you can add in a dark shrine, when to do it, how to warp in the DTs and stuff like that, but it isn't necessary. This build has a lot of firepower just by itself, and up until basically top 25, top 30 Grandmaster, if you manage to hit at the timing where I hit, I think you're going to be basically killing everyone with your first 8 adepts. Now, we follow up our regular opening with the 20 Nexus, of course, 20 Cybernetics core, which is very standard for a 1 gate expand. As you can see, I'm not getting a lot of gas. I constantly have 16 probes on minerals here. We get a 21 second assimilator into the 22 supply pylon. Now, if you're a bit confused what all these numbers mean, that's the number of supply, as you can see here, that there is currently in the game, and that's how we usually talk about build orders, when to build what. We don't use time, we just use supply. So there's that. I scout a little bit with my probe. It's not all that important right now. Try to get your pylon as close to your mineral line as possible, but not in an obvious scouted location. So if you have the decision to either build it over here or over here, I'd much rather build it here. It's further away from any good overlord spots, maybe in this area. If an overlord flies in from here, then this is a better location. But you don't want to build it all the way here, because it costs a lot of mining time for your probe to walk there. And as the build is quite tight, you don't want to be doing too much of that. So just rally into the gases, 16 on minerals at all times, very important. And then the moment your cybernetics core starts or finishes, you start your warp gate, you start your 1 adept, which you chrono boost. You can send your probe back home. And this is when the build really, starts to differ a bit from most regular PvZ builds, where perhaps you would skip the warp gate and get a stargate. Now, after we start our first adept, we start our Twilight Council in the main base. Notice that I'm not chrono boosting probes anymore at this point. I get a Stalker out, which I can decide to chrono boost. I can also decide not to chrono boost it. For safety, you can chrono boost it if you feel unsafe. Now, once you reach 200 minerals and 100 gas, you can build a robotics facility, and the probe that built the robotics facility can go to the natural. So you pull that one out of gas. In this case, I also pull another one out of gas, but that makes the DT transition a bit harder. So I would not suggest it. Afterwards, you try to get your second gateway before your warp gate research is at 54 out of 100, which means the moment warp gate finishes, your gate will start transforming, which is the ideal timing. After your stalker finishes, you start your glaive adept upgrade, your glaive, I think it's just called glaives now, resonating glaives upgrade, and you go into 1 more adept from the gateway, which you can build before warp gate finishes. Now, important to note here is that at this point, we should be at 38 out of 46 supply, and we're not building any more workers at this point. Like, this one will still finish, but we're not queuing up any more new workers. That's because we need the money to add 2 extra gateways, in our main base preferably. All of our chrono will be going into our resonating glaives, and 1 chrono will go into our robotics facility, which after we build the prism in the robotics facility, we can resume probe production. So you see, robotics facility finishes. I can start this prism. I start a probe and I start a pylon. I said I start a probe and I start a pylon. There we go. So I start a probe, I start a pylon. At this point, my second adept finishes. I have 3 units, which makes me pretty safe against any kind of early link floods. My warp gate is very fast, so baling bust, roach attacks are all very doable to beat with this opener. We get a second pylon, or well, it's a 4th pylon, but we build 2 pylons at the same time. We stop building workers once we're 42 out of 46 supply and warp in 2 more adepts. And at this time, our warp prism finishes as well. We should have 3 chrono boost on the Twilight Council at this point. We shade forward and we fly the prism across the map. We can queue up an observer behind this, another pylon. Now, if you get run by it in this time by Zerglings, just warp in 1 adept at home and perhaps strengthen your wall with another pylon. Don't warp too much in at home. The majority of your unit should be on the other side of the map. Of course, unless there's 30 links here, then you can warp in 2 adepts. But still continue your attack. Warp in, well, 4 adepts usually. In this case only 3 because I had to warp in 1 here. You shade in. And the shade here is either you shade into the main, walk towards the 3rd, or you walk towards the 3rd base, you shade into the main base. In this case I shade into the 3rd base. I see only links, so I let the shade finish. Fly with my prism into the main, with 2 adepts. And I just warp in there. And yeah, pretty easy win, honestly, no? He doesn't have any roaches ready. If your opponent doesn't have roaches or banelings, they usually just instantly win. You usually instantly win the game. Otherwise, maybe you need to wait 1 or 2 warp-ins. And then you can go. The follow-up is just get 2 extra gases, start an Immortal, and then take a 3rd base, go into Forge, and Blink. Just play Immortal, Blink, then go into Storm eventually. So, that's basically it for this. If you did enjoy it, don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment. I'll see all of you next time in the next video. Bye bye.